Hello, welcome to my YouTube University. Today we will discuss about dispersion. In this video you will learn about number 1, definition of dispersion, number 2, measures of dispersion, number 3 : types of measures of dispersion, number 4 : absolute measure of dispersion like range, variance, standard deviation, quartiles, and quartile deviation, mean, and mean deviation, and so on. Number 4, relative measures of dispersion. Let's start. What is dispersion in statistics? Dispersion is the state of getting dispersed or spread. Statistical dispersion means the extent to which numerical data is likely to vary about an average value. In other words, dispersion helps to understand the distribution of the data. Measures of dispersion in statistics. The measures of dispersion help to interpret the variability of data, i.e. to know how much homogeneous or heterogeneous the data is. In simple terms, it shows how squeezed or scattered the variable is. Types of measures of dispersion. There are two main types of dispersion methods in statistics, which are absolute measure of dispersion, relative measure of dispersion. Absolute measure of dispersion. An absolute measure of dispersion contains the same unit as the original dataset. The absolute dispersion method expresses the variations in terms of the average of deviations of observations like standard or means deviations. It includes range, standard deviation, quartile deviation, etc. The types of absolute measures of dispersion are: range. It is simply the difference between the maximum value and the minimum value given in a dataset. Example, 1, 3, 5, 6, 7 equals greater than range equals 7, 1 equals 6. Variance, deduct the mean from each data in the set, square each of them and add each square, and finally divide them by the total no of values in the dataset to get the variance. Variance, sigma 2, equals x minus mu 2/n. Standard deviation. The square root of the variance is known as the standard deviation, i.e. st equals sigma. Quartiles and quartile deviation. The quartiles are values that divide a list of numbers into quarters. The quartile deviation is half of the distance between the third and the first quartile. Mean and mean deviation. The average of numbers is known as the mean, and the arithmetic mean of the absolute deviations of the observations from a measure of central tendency is known as the mean deviation, also called mean absolute deviation. Relative measure of dispersion. The relative measures of dispersion are used to compare the distribution of two or more data sets. This measure compares values without units. Common relative dispersion methods include coefficient of range, coefficient of variation, coefficient of standard deviation, coefficient of quartile deviation, coefficient of mean deviation,